Microphone is totally muted. Welcome to the future and beyond. So this video is to serve as an overview for what this next video series is going to be all about and what you are going to be creating along with me. So this next assignment is to boldly go. I have so much fun. If you've been doing the rest of these videos, the amount of work that you've put into them, you should be pretty far along and have a pretty good idea for what it is that we're taking on and what the general rules of composition and painting are. And we want to use all those things that we've learned up until this point to create an absolutely beautiful final scene. The scene is going to be a space station and a spaceship combined in one shot. And that's what we're seeing here. So you can imagine, if this is an environment for animation, that there's a character that's standing on this walkway looking out the glass window at his cargo ship as it's being loaded or unloaded in this meteorite space station, spaceship type space. I hope that this starts to get you inspired for what it is that you can create for this project. I think that sci-fi art is so cool, and it's got so many lessons to teach us as well when it comes to design and how we think about design in any genre or anything that we're creating. Now for the fun part. For this painting, you can see that we've got the walls of the spaceship. They're detailed out. They're really, really clean looking. We've got the glowiness that's going on that lets you know it's sci-fi. And now let's start zooming into our spaceship within this scene. So as we start to zoom in, once, nothing really changes. Twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. Here we go, 7. We're getting a little bit closer. Now we can start to focus on some of the details that are going on within this space station. And you can see that there is a massive amount of detail that's going on within this piece to give it that sense of epic scale that these space scenes often require. So as we start to zoom in a little bit further, we can really get an idea of how much detail I've placed within this scene. And it's pretty cool. This is the power of digital art. So if you were to paint something like this on a traditional sheet of paper, like you might have worked through when you were in high school, or a canvas, the canvas would have to be absolutely massive for you to be able to get this level of detail within your scene. So this is the normal sized resolution for this picture. And you can see how deep we can go into it when we actually zoom back. This is the final, y'all. Pull out all the stops. It's sort of like the Great British Baking Show. You know, this is the final bake. Let's see what you're going to really impress the judges with. And here's how this painting began. Oops. There we go. So in the beginning, I had my sketch, and I've got my loose idea of where I want my elements to be. I'm always thinking about storytelling whenever I'm doing one of these space station, spaceship paintings. So one of the stories that I wanted to tell was, how did they actually connect the glass to the meteoroid? So underneath the glass, I wanted to be able to tell the story of how they built this place, right? So you can see the drilling and the boring that took place to be able to create this flat surface for them to intersect this window here, and it's sort of revealed behind. So that's what's going on there. And then I was really thinking about, what kind of micro details could I add to this box type shape over here on the left-hand side that's in juxtaposition of all the other organic shapes that I have within the window that still makes it feel like this is a much smaller object and the space station is absolutely huge. I knew I was going to have a whole bunch of noise up in this area around the space station and trying to figure out how to be able to populate those regions. And so, yeah, all those little details within that box that I sketched out previously, that's what they end up becoming in the end. and they're really, really faint. You don't even notice how much stuff is going on within that box. But if I don't put these things and consider this stuff within here, that box is going to feel extraordinarily empty compared to the rest of the shot. This is the same reason why we want all these little details and screws and text and everything in different patterns. There's a little checkerboard pattern that's going on within this metal over here on the left-hand side to be able to really make this scene come to life. So you can see that this has got patterning on it as well, so that a ground does not just become a ground. It's made up with all kinds of different materials and patterns, and we're really thinking through every aspect of this. So let's get in and let's start talking about sci-fi style just a little bit more. So within this image, we've got what you instantly recognize as being a sci-fi circle or sphere or doorway. And even though it's just a circle with some other circles going around it, instantly our brain knows that this is sci-fi. So let's start giving ourselves some parameters to be able to talk about when it comes to what makes good sci-fi design and why this is going to be useful for you within your own illustrations and your own drawing. So one of the main things that I have figured out that really makes sci-fi drawings tick and work is the tertiary level of detail. 3 levels of detail within sci-fi. So if we take this doorway that we're looking at and we remove one of the layers, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more simple, a lot less interesting to look at. What do I mean by that? So essentially, we just have a circular doorway, okay? And if we take away all the bisecting pieces within this door, so for example, within this circle, we've got another concentric circle, we've got a little sphere here in the middle, we've got some other little tight circles, and if we took all those away, this design would become much more flat. It'd become much more boring. And this repetition of sh shape, so we have thick lines, thin lines, thin lines, thick lines, thicker lines with this circle is starting to create a unique rhythm that feels like a gear or a mechanism that is really, really visually appealing to us. After that, they start to take this doorway and start to subdivide it into various planes. So what I mean by that is we're looking at the circles within circles. Look at this big old metal piece that has the red stripes on it. Within that circle, all of a sudden they're starting to bisect it out to where it's got different plates of metal that are assembled with the nuts and the bolts to be able to create a unique visual overlay over this very, very simple shape, which is just a circle. But by adding this these mechanical cutouts and pieces into this, and these other forms inside of a basic form, we're starting to get a much, much closer to the sci-fi look and feel. So think of it this way. We've got our big shapes. We've got a second layer of shapes within those big silhouettes and forms that we're creating. And then what makes sci-fi so unique is that it has a tertiary level of detail, a third level of detail. So now that we understand, we can look at those black lines that make up the circles. We've got our big metal piece that starts to open up. But as we look into the white sections that are outside of the striped part on this metal circular section, you can start to see that these little stickers start to show up. We've got this little arrow here that says that's leading to a USB port that says stop on it. You've got some other little buttons and an airlock with a card reader in it. Over here on the right-hand side, you've got another little hatch with more little triangles on it. And just within this one little section, if that's all you saw, you would know instantly that this is some type of sci-fi motif. And you would know that because we've got the big shapes subdivided into a secondary level of detail, and then there is a tertiary level of detail within every shape on this doorway. And that is what makes this particular picture so striking for sci-fi. Now, a lot of our rules are still going to apply here. We still have the idea of the 70-30 rule. It doesn't go away. The 70-30 rule is something that we talked about early on within the Welcome to the Jungle project at the very beginning of this video series. And that's the idea that 30% of your scene is what you want the viewer to focus on. Within this painting that we're looking at now, the focal point is really, really strong. We've got our brightest colors. We've got our line art that's all leading the viewer's eye. This little path over here, this stream, the rays of light, the waterfall, this other little stream from the waterfall is all starting to bisect the painting, the brightest colors within the painting, to get us to look at this space station over here on the right-hand side. And this space station, this whole little area with its tighter mechanical details, higher levels of contrast, more visual noise that's being created. It's almost, yeah, it's like a water wheel. That's really cool. Um, we've got 70% of the rest of the painting that is there to get us to the 30% we actually want the audience to focus on. So with those three levels of detail, we in thinking about the 70-30 rule, we've got a pretty good inroad to what makes solid sci-fi design work. One of the other things that I want you guys to consider for this assignment, for this project, we're going to be designing the space station as well as the spaceship. And you're going to need to go out and look up some reference imagery. You've all seen sci-fi 1,000 times before. You know what this genre is, but if you don't draw it all the time, if you don't have an expertise in this field, you're going to be doing yourself a massive disservice by just trying to invent this stuff out of your head. One of the great places to look at for sci-fi, and one of the things that makes good sci-fi actually work. A lot of times the bad stuff that I see is that it's too box-like. The shapes and the forms are too simplistic, and we haven't really thought through the curvature in a smart and intelligent way. So looking at motorcycle design, and we're talking about the speed bikes, the road bikes, not necessarily the Harley Davidsons out there, but this high-end sports cars as well are a great example of this. The curvature on these vehicles and the way that they do the plastic press or the metal press to be able to create the molding for these vehicles is straight out of sci-fi design. It absolutely is. Maybe it's life imitating art or vice versa. But look at this plane here right in the middle. So underneath the Suzuki logo, you've got this blue piece of plate metal. That one's interesting, but I think that this whole black section below it, where the seat, where your butt or your crotch actually sits at, is a lot more dynamic and a lot more interesting. Just above the metal chassis, that's bright silver with the two little yellow dots next to it, there is a piece of metal there, and that little piece of metal is totally sci-fi. So we have one big form that's broken down into a secondary form, smaller shapes, right? And then we've got that tertiary level of detail within the design. Only with this one, they're not just doing it with nuts and bolts as that third level of detail. Instead, they're describing the third level of detail with the planes and angles that are creating these different plateaus on the vehicle. So what's so cool about this is that you've got a good balance of sharper shapes mixed with or sharper lines and folds that combine with softer, more rounded shapes. So you can see a really sharp cut that's going through it, and that goes into a rounded shape that goes back into a plane that's recessing into the vehicle that gradually, very softly, goes back out. And they're at different angles. And this is what makes good sci-fi actually work. If you look at the front of the vehicle as well, where it says GX on there with the little red right above that X form, you can see the same thing that I'm talking about, where we've got some really sharp lines that are going on the front of this bike, but that's also followed up by some softer planes and angles that are still very much intentional for the design of this vehicle. This play, this complex, advanced play of sharp and soft edges, or edges that start to taper out, that start sharp and then disappear halfway through like a loose fold within paper, or a fold that you don't complete all the way through is a sheet of paper if you bended it in half and only folded it halfway across the crease. This is sort of like the advanced level of object design. And if you can get here with these sci-fi designs, if you can start thinking about the edge flow and the edge shape of these planes within these vehicles in this kind of way, you're going to be creating something world class. This is the level that separates the beginners from the not so beginner folks, the less advanced sci-fi designs. If you're just creating something that's really boxy and maybe it's got a couple little octagons or squares cut out in it, it's probably not going to look that good, you guys. And I want you to be able to create something that's really strong and you feel proud of, that speaks to sci-fi design as a whole. You cannot do this if you're working in the realm of sci-fi design. You are adding your own sentence, your own blurb, your own line to a story of design that's been going on for a very long time with people who are very good at this. And you need to start looking at the masters within this field, and you need to start looking at other people that are out there that are dang good at this. And there's plenty of work. Humans are never going to stop imagining what the future could look like, what direction design could go in the future. We are forever as a species in this limited amount of time that we have here going to be fascinated by what the future might hold. So we're talking about planes. I want to talk to you guys about a couple other things, right? So within the space stations themselves, when you're building out, where I see the space stations fail and become less interesting than they could be, is when the students just make flat wall shapes. This is one of the challenges of this project, is to get you guys breaking up to where you're not just creating, a box shape like a diorama that you would present in second grade with a turtle in it to this project. Instead, we're thinking about the design and how we can break up these wall structures in fascinating and unique ways that really help to tell the story for the space. So here we've got some kind of cryo sleeping chamber that's going on, but instead of just putting the sleeping chamber out in the middle of a room and everything else is flat around it, they've had the novel concept of creating some stairs to be able to break up the height of the space. In the classic sci-fi motif, they've rounded the corners here, and there's a lot more metal that they're using. On the back side of the metal stuff, we've got this grating that's going up that's really, really nice. And the same rule is applying here, right? So we still have that 70-30 rule, where does the artist want our focus to be? On the cryo chamber. The rest of the scene has got line work that's bringing our eyes down into this particular section. We've got the brightest section of the piece, and then we've got another 70% of this piece that is there to reinforce and tell the story and get us to the part that they want us to look at. So imagine this: you're doing a sci-fi space station spaceship. If you wanted to do a sci-fi train station or pneumatic tube that people travel in, interstellarly or around space, you could totally do something like this, where this is where the canister that a person is housed in lands, and then they get shot back out from there. There's a movie called Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme. He totally heads back into the past in something that is not the best design for a spaceship ever, but it looks kind of like this. All right. One of the other things that you guys can think about within this project is coming up with a real sense of scale within your scenes. Please do not forget the rules of composition and how we are playing with the viewer's attention and the viewer's eyes in moving them through the scene. This is a space station and a spaceship. We're going to see a couple more examples of that, but how can you actually go in and create that truly massive scale, if you decide to, within your scene? Oops. And one of the ways that they do this is with little tiny windows, right? So that looks like a VCR or a sound system or some kind of server farm or something like that that they've maybe even cut and pasted in here and hidden out to be able to get those little lights within this space, right? We're finding all kinds of areas to be able to drop those little tiny, almost Christmas light size pieces in there with the little tiny window scale to be able to tell the story of a massive, massive space station. I think that's a really, really beautiful way to do this is also with the intense lighting coming from a moon or from a sun out there in open space. Love the color system in this one with the yellows and the purples. Got a little bit of atmosphere that's going on within this as well, or atmosphere escaping from the space station. I think that's pretty nice. One of the things that you can think about for this project is what type of space ship and space station am I going to be doing? Am I doing near future stuff? Am I going through and thinking, within the next 100 years? Or is this far future stuff, the next 500 to 1,000 years? Or I've got no problem with this, but if you're going to do this and you're going to go alien with this project, you need to really do your research on developing, being able to visually tell the story of the aliens' um, design language. And frankly, there's a lot more, if you're just starting off with this, there's a lot more reference imagery out there for humanoid Terran made objects and items than there is full, really successful alien biome ships. So you could imagine that your character lands their big ship on an alien outpost and it's got two opposing different design styles. Then you need to think about how does one design style match with the with with the other alien races or the humanoid design style? How do they oppose one another? How do you still make both of those different, totally separated and developed design languages work together in one scene in a compatible way that actually makes sense? So here we go. Inevitably, there's going to be some of you guys that say, "Oh, I want to do a mech." Well, mechs are really, really hard to do, and I want to talk to you about some of the composition choices. Um, your first thought, and we've talked about this before, the first thought that you're going to come up with out of the gate is going to be a top level idea. It's going to be just skimming the surface of what it is that you can create within this scene. I would encourage you guys to do some iteration, to do some real exploration, and really load your brains up with reference images because you're going to have the vagueness of an idea. You're going to start drawing, and you're going to start drawing the walls, and you're going to realize, wait, I don't really know how to be able to break up effectively sci-fi walls. And if you don't look at your reference images and break there and realize when you are feeling your way through the dark, then it's not going to turn out very good. You need to go back to your reference images, and you're totally okay with saying, okay, this is a cool way to break up the walls. We can have giant lights going all the way down. That's something I can do. But this is becoming a little bit too repetitive here. How could I break this up in the middle and give it a little bit more interest so that we're avoiding just big old open areas like this. This sci-fi scene here is not the best in the entire world. This is also an example of an establishing shot. You've got the choice for this project whether or not you want to do and you could do an establishing shot, but you can also think about the placement. Always think about the placement of your characters within the scene. Are your characters just stepping off of their spaceship after returning from a long journey? Are your characters, like in Star Wars, being pinned down while they're trying to get back to their ship and they're surrounded by all the enemies everywhere and the scene seems hopeless? This particular shot is a little bit better than the establishing shot, and this is totally okay. So often within your within your scene, you're going to say, okay, I've got to do a space station, I've got to do a spaceship, and I've got to show off the entire spaceship all the way and the entire space station all at once, and you're gonna break your brain. I'm letting you know right now, it's okay to be able to do a shot that doesn't show off the entire ship. It doesn't have to. It can only show half of the ship, or if the ship is a part of your composition, that's totally fine, right? You don't have to show the entire thing for the final turn in. It is a spaceship and a space station together. And it's more important to tell the story because we're also going to have the orthographic views. Here's a good example of an alien type world and then a more Terran sort of, evolved space shuttle looking design. It still has the 70-30 rule happening with it because we got 30% of the detail on the back, and then we've got these smooth planes up on the front of the design. But yeah, this is a kind of a big tick type creature. Here's a good one to talk about some more sci-fi design. To bring it back, we've got the that circle that we looked at in the very beginning. Same thing for those three levels of detail you're going to be applying to everything within your scene, from chairs to benches to handrails to glasses and windows, three levels of detail. In particular, one area that I see students get lost and struggle with quite a bit is ground and sci-fi ground and how that can work and how that can look. If you haven't ever played any sci-fi video games, maybe you have. It doesn't mean that you've got this stuff memorized. You really need to be looking at reference images when you create this stuff. So here we have got what could be a fairly boring interior design space, but they've given it the sci-fi makeover, especially on the ground area to help carry this composition in a really interesting way. So let's look at it. This ground plane has got a clear and defined walkway to it, right? So we've got the white area. It always helps to have some stripes going across your ground plane also. And then they've broken up that ground plane with their metal grating or their different planes. In addition to having those stripes so we've got the big flat square that our character over here on the right-hand side is standing on. From there, we've got our secondary level of detail with our big shapes. And then within our big shapes, we've got a tertiary level of detail with our little tiny stickers and little elements that are sticking out here from the walkway itself. You can see them all throughout. And that is really coming together to be able to create that sci-fi motif that we're looking for when you guys are creating things. So don't neglect the ground. Don't neglect the ceiling. You can break the ceiling up into this like molded plastic looking stuff. This helps quite a bit. And then your wall spaces, just look over here, these glorious walls, how much they've broken them up. This is where that ambient occlusion pass within your scenes really comes into handy because we're going to have a lot more angles and getting those little tight shadows, the corner shadows within our shots is really going to come in handy in a massive way. Next thing I want to talk to you guys about is stars, space. So, like all the other projects that we've worked on, time management is a very important aspect to consider. I want you guys to think about if you are showing the outer galaxy, or if you decide to drop your space station right next to a giant planet, how you can paint those things effectively. I don't want you spending, 20 hours of your time painting the surface of a gas giant planet or the upper atmosphere of a gas giant planet. You need to be able to do this stuff quickly. This is where the stars come in. So if you've got a window within your space station that's showing stars for this galaxy, do not go through and paint every one of those stars. There's more than you can count in the sky. So instead, save yourself some time. Just go on to Google, or Bing or wherever and download yourself a massive, purely black and white image of the stars. And then set it to screen within Photoshop, and you will get a bunch of white little dots on whatever kind of background that you want to create. Please be wary about creating backgrounds that are too nebulous. What I mean by nebulous is up here. Okay, so we can see that we've got all this smoke, all this distortion. A lot of times people want to think about, well, I'm going to have my space station and my spaceship, and then there's going to be like, a star exploding in the background with a big old spiral galaxy. Well, what ends up happening when you have one of these multi-rainbowed spiral galaxies within your scene is it takes away from the viewer's attention. It's very hard to work visually a spiral nebula galaxy that's all kinds of, all kinds of multicolored within your environment. We're trying to get the audience to be able to focus on the space station and especially the spaceship within our scene, because the character is going to have some kind of interest in the spaceship. It's either coming or going from it. They're overlooking, inspecting their ship. The ship is just landing, and their dad came home from being away in space for the last 6 months. And this opening here, you can see how the artist has smartly chosen not to put a big spiral galaxy. It's not purple, it's not anything. It's looking off into the deepness of space. And you can see that we do have the planet that's starting to show up, but instead of trying to show every little detail on this planet, we've got most of the planet covered, and the planet really is just being represented as kind of a big textured line within this shot. If you had exposed the entire planet, think about how this black area would be competing with all the noise that's happening within this spaceship here. So this spaceship is the thing that we're supposed to look at. We can tell because it's got 30% of the noise, the most contrast, the brightest saturation is going on within the spaceship. And if we've got that much visual noise texture that's happening within this planet, it's going to take away from what it is we want the audience to look at, which is this spaceship. I hope that that makes sense to you guys. I've got some other examples that I wanted you all to look at and to think about while you're designing your spaceships. So you've got the choice to be able to think about whether your spaceship is going to be for a singular pilot. In the TV show The Mandalorian, I have no idea how the Mandalorian was traveling all the way across space in that horribly compact ship that he was using. It seemed like, you would need more space to get up and move around inside of that. With him and Grogu in there, it was way too small of a ship. Okay. But you can decide for this project if you want to do a massive spaceship or one that holds a singular person. Here we go. I think some of these photos have still got to download a little bit. Please keep in mind that this needs to be a space station, not a base that is located on a planet. It can be out of which I don't want to see any kind of like long-term settlements or housing down on planet level. This is not a project for you guys to go in and create an alien biosphere like Dr. Seuss and try to create something like that for your final project. That is not what we're looking for. We are looking for a space station. Yeah, it can exist on a rocky planet, but a planet that already has a biome on it, we don't want to see anything like that. We need to be able to see some space in there. Looks like some more of my shots. So we'll go back and talk a little bit more about this one while some more pictures are hopefully downloading. But we can talk about the 70-30 rule again and that tertiary levels of detail. So this has got a beautiful shape to the entire ship. From that shape, we're breaking it down into smaller pieces, and then it's really the tertiary level of detail. So we're using those stickers to be able to cut out some of these areas, right? This part is darker. We got the dark part, the black part on the front of the ship. We got the orange stripe that's going down it. And within this racing stripe, if they just left it as a racing stripe, it would have been okay. But instead, they've broken it down. They've got some cutouts, some divots within the form and within the shape. We've got other little, antennas for speaking around there. In the middle of this four, we've got a piece that's sticking out there in the front. There's some rivets. And you can see how they're breaking up these bigger shapes, this long stripe here on the ship with smaller bits and baubles along the way. That's really making this thing so successful as a sci-fi design. And they've done that throughout the entire ship. Anywhere that you can look on this, um, it is broken down into, it's not just a grill, right? Instead, we've got the accompanying third level of details that's going on here with the screws, the little triangles, always with the little triangles in sci-fi. And and it's really starting to work. So you're going to get there, you're going to come up with your big design on your ship, but please do not forget about that third level of detail. That's really what is going to make these things look professional and look absolutely great. This one again is following the 70-30 rule where we've got our big shape, and then the way that we're breaking out and dividing the attention that we want people to look at within our design is really, really well handled. It's also really well rendered, also for a lighter colored spaceship. And you can see how well they're getting into that pseudo-mechanical design. So where do you come up with stuff like this if you've never done this before? Well, you can look at pieces of construction equipment are a great spot to start. Love these two. You can also look to real life creatures, Soviet era Russian large pieces of construction equipment, sort of these insular pieces of technology that were developed without looking at what the rest of the world was doing, are really useful and unique. You can look at sea life. You can look at, design kitchen gadgets or things that you would use in the bathroom, beard trimmers, whatever. It can all be given that sci-fi motif and sci-fi effect. So this one's probably, designed off of a manta ray or something like that. It's a beautiful illustration that the artist is starting to go through and work with. Notice how thin the lines are. There's a lot of you guys that are still drawing with really, really thick lines. Get away from that. You need thin lines for this project. Those thinner lines are going to help you build into these tertiary levels of detail and really plan these things out. So with this sketch, here is what the final rendering ended up looking like on this project. And I think this is absolutely a beautiful rendering when it comes to the level of detail that they're describing while still letting it stay loose and painterly. We can still see some of the brushwork, but it's doing a fabulous job of describing the shape of this vehicle while still having painterly elements to it. So look here, right? We can see all the brushwork that's going on within this section of the ship. We can still see the painter's marks, but we've still got the rounded form and shape that we're trying to describe for the artist. That still allows you to be able to create that tertiary level of detail, right? So we've got this big old plane here, but they've been able to break up that plane with a lot of brushwork. That's really, really well done, and some shading inside of those little details inside the plane. And it just turns out absolutely beautiful with the way that they've created this overall ship, and then using the color space to be able to break it up further, right? So all of this is rendered out remarkably well. Really, really nice, right? That's totally a little still life painting of a golden egg right there. Still, your ship has got shading and lighting. Bounce lighting isn't taken into consideration within the painting of the ship. So you can see how the shadows are not just shadow areas, but instead we've got some cool blues and purples that are going on within the shadow region that still start to describe the ship's form and shape, and the lighting is realistic. So you've got a lot of stuff on your plate here, right? Some of you guys can draw, and you're going to be able to draw this ship well enough. Some of you guys are good at coloring and flat shading. You're going to be able to do that well enough, but can you get the lighting, and with the lighting still use the lighting to be able to help and describe the form on these spaceships? This one isn't quite downloading on my computer yet. It's been sitting on Dropbox for a while, but you can see that this one is most likely based off of some type of piece of CAT construction equipment, and they've given it the sci-fi motif to bring it into space. There we go. There's another one that definitely was built off of some type of construction equipment, and it's that same idea. It's going to become repetitive at this point when it comes to the 70-30 rule, the tertiary levels of detail. I hope you're starting to be able to see it, right? So we've got this big old arm piece over here, and I think the wireframe is turned on for this thing, but inside of those big shapes, we're breaking down each one of those big shapes into a secondary level of detail, and then there's a third level of detail with the way they're creating the planes and the pieces that are coming out. Uh, Here's one that is totally begging to be turned into a sci-fi ship. And you can imagine now that we've got our sci-fi goggles on, just what something like this might end up looking like. There was my reference image for the space station spaceship that I did. And this guy still outdid me. I have no idea. I gave it everything I had, every piece in me to be able to recreate this type of style, and he still has his ship more detailed out than what I was able to create. It's just an absolutely stunning and awe-inspiring piece of art. Look at all that down there. Madness. And it still works. It still reads its scale. Masterfully done. There you go. One created off of a Stingray. Really nice job with the sci-fi platform there. There it is in 3D. There's the initial drawings for it. Okay. We're getting up there in time. So let's start talking about what the next steps are going to look like. So one of the first things you're going to be asked to do for this assignment is, in addition to your well-developed sketches, you're going to be asked to create an orthographic drawing of the spaceship. That means a three-quarters view, a top view, a side view, and giving us a few different shots. And what this is designed to do is to get you really thinking about the forms and the design of your spaceship. You should, along the way, start to learn your curves, your drawing style, and you're creating a visual motif that you want to be able to go back and apply to maybe your entire space station in some kind of way, using some of those same visual elements or shape language that you're developing within the spaceship, and see how you can blow that up and apply it to the space station that you're going to be designing as well. So for these ships, you're not required to render all of them. I think one of them you do need to put like flat color on. I'll show you some previous examples of these spaceships in the orthographic views. Cool. So in the in-person sessions that I run for this one, we usually do an in-class speed drawing, and you can totally see that weird physical object from before turned into a spaceship. And I give folks an hour and a half to be able to create, 8 different illustrations for their spaceships and what they might actually look like. And for this particular run, I had some good ones that could have worked well. But from there, you're going to take your design, and you're going to do the orthographic drawings of this ship. So we've got a three-quarters view, a top view, a side view, and I think that's a front view of the ship. And that ended up looking like this when I rendered it out. So this is my ship, and this pairs really well with the final illustration that you're going to be creating, so that within your portfolio, you show that you can concept and bring into final execution a really strong drawing. So you can do the concept work for a spaceship, but then you can also implement this spaceship within a background and environment work of art. I'll try and get over to another one. All right. So here was another one where I went through, and looks like I got 6 instead of 8 this time, getting soft in my old age. But here were the various concepts for it. I've never really seen like an asteroid mining ship all that often, so I want to do one of those. But I really liked this one quite a bit. I thought that this looked cool. And so then I went through and did my orthographic drawing. So again, I have a top view, a front view, side view, and three-quarters view. And in this case, I wanted to go through and actually render this out to show what it might look like while it's painted. You can see how strong that looks within a portfolio of your work. And that one ended up becoming this entire scene, which this shot got the parallax treatment, and there's a camera that moves through it. So when the actual shot is shown, you start off sort of down here. There's some sparks flying out of this section. Camera moves over to the left. If I had more time, there would be more detail. There'd be another one of these platforms that flies by the front of the shot, and then it zooms through here and then reveals this painted spaceship landing within the space station in Dino Rock. Yeah. So you got some things to think about. You got some work ahead of you. Sci-fi stuff is absolutely beautiful to make and create. I hope you enjoy this. Have fun with the shapes and forms that you're creating, especially for the spaceships and the space stations. You can get really wild with the shapes of the walls and the scale. And this is a real test of, what is your creative prowess? What kind of architecture are you able to design? Get into the research, have fun exploring this topic. Um, it's a really cool project to be able to end it on. And yeah, I hope that gets you set up and thinking about the next steps for this. Thanks for watching.